Welcome to the Dissolutions podcast, brought to you by the Goethe Institute Ukraine. This series features artists from Eastern Europe, the Baltics, the South Caucasus, and Central Asia, reflecting on their work, local contexts, and what it means to be an artist today. The podcast is part of Dissolutions Decolonial Encounters, a program exploring post-colonial practices across art, culture, and civil society.
Inga Levi, a Kiev-based artist, joined the residency in Armenia at the invitation of Leah Dostlieva. Armenia had long been on her list. She'd visited Georgia before, but never had the chance to explore its neighbor. Encountering local initiatives and research of CSN Lab left her deeply inspired. What struck her most was the openness and intensity with which local artists and researchers shared their practices.
There are lots of things to learn from them. In fact, each of the group we are presented here, they're just marvelous. If we had even more time, I would like to learn even more about Armenia, about how people are, how do they think. Now I know that it's a very important experience for me, this residency.
A key part of the residency for Inga was the exchange with artists from Central Asia and the South Caucasus. Speaking with them one-on-one offered insights into different local contexts. And yet, she noticed a common thread, the pursuit of freedom and transformation.
We have different situations now in their country and in my country, but we strive for the same thing, for freedom. But the situations we are in make us acting differently in these circumstances. But I was really glad to see that we really have some common values. Everyone is trying to make some impact on its place where we are.
Traveling abroad, Inga often felt obliged to represent Ukraine as an ambassador to call people's attention to the war that Ukraine fights against Russia. Here, Inga allowed herself to listen more than to speak, with the intention of understanding what life under different kinds of Russian oppression is like and how people cope with it. That shift, she says, became one of the most valuable parts of the experience.
This residency is a chance to listen more than to tell for me, because before I was in Europe, I was feeling I am obliged to this ambassador part. Here it's totally different, and this is for me the most valuable experience.
For many years, Inga worked in traditional painting. More recently, she began expanding her practice, experimenting with installation and contemporary media. That path led her to explore the urban environment, architecture, public spaces, and how they reflect inner states.
It kind of transformed into the interest of inner landscape and outer landscape, the way they influence each other. But when the full-scale war started, the center of my attention shifted. Still, I use some means of city infrastructure or something like that in my works. It's still connected to the city, but the main center shifted to the topic of war.
The full-scale Russian invasion profoundly altered Inga's artistic focus. War became central, displacing earlier concerns. Yet, the city remains. Its structures and fragments still appear, now charged with new meanings. The war also intensified her need to question and reclaim her identity, both cultural and ethnic, a subject she had never addressed before in her work.
My project was about my Jewish family, how they lived in Kiev, what I remember about their place. It's near my parents' place in Kiev, and I used to spend a lot of time. It's not many things I really remember because I was a child, but I remembered some phrases that my grandmothers said in the mix of Yiddish and Russian, because my grandfathers could speak Yiddish, but they really didn't need it because of the Soviet Union, where everyone spoke Russian, and they only used Yiddish, jokingly mixing words, adding some Yiddish endings to them. This is the way I remember this world was look like, and I used this phrase. I remember it's funny. Положи колбаскис в кастрюлькис. For me, this small episode just represents some bigger picture of how the life of Jews looked like in the late Soviet Union. What is left for me from this culture to absorb in this situation?
Inga's work reimagined elements of her grandparents' apartment. The artist drew dreamlike sketches on the walls of the gallery, comforting artifacts among burnt windows.
These images speak to the dual nature of home, a side of illusory safety and a reflection of external violence that penetrates the walls.
I drew elements of this apartment on the walls of the gallery, some dreams about this place. Also, I added the door that was covered with bricks, like the door to the synagogue. You can see that it's some Jewish topic. The window burned out, which refers to cities destroyed by Russians now, because it's something that I see all the time. It's also about the state of danger. When you are threatened, you start to rethink your identity. It can really be a trigger to understanding yourself differently, to value things which you didn't value enough before.
Working with the topic of war has taken an emotional toll. Inga admits it's exhausting.
Still, she continues driven by a sense of duty to complete what she started. Double Exposure series, the artistic project of everyday drawing of the diary imposed on the war events, she carries out from February 26, 2022.
Her perseverance is personal, but also reflects a wider sense of duty mainly Ukrainian artists feel today. When speaking about expectations placed on Ukrainian artists today, she mentions an inner calling, a kind of self-imposed responsibility.
I would say that the main thing expected is some ambassadoring role of Ukrainian art. I would say that it's a role that we ourselves impose on ourselves, not anyone from outside. I don't feel that something is expected from me. Lately, all those projects I was involved in gave me huge freedom. In fact, I even didn't expect such a trust.
Reflecting on what keeps her going, she believes that movement is the only antidote to collapse.
I think that the only way not to lay down is just to keep moving, not thinking, do you want it or no? Do you have a strength for it or no? To act is the answer. It's something that we connect to hope, because in Ukrainian, even the word nadiya contains the word dia, which is act. Many of us choose to act as a way to survive.
That need to keep moving forward is mirrored in deeper shifts in how she relates to language, memory, and cultural space. Inga sees decolonial practice as a process of refusing influences that diminish one's own culture. In her case, this means shedding Russian cultural and linguistic dominance. After February 24th, she stopped speaking Russian entirely and embraced Ukrainian fully.
This was an easy thing to do.
Even in Armenia, she's acutely aware of Russian presence in signs, in conversations. Inga wishes for more linguistic autonomy.
Language is not the only thing, of course, but one of the first things. The language really shapes the way you think. I really changed my cultural space because I was influenced by this Russian cultural space that was totally present in Ukraine. I was out of it gradually, but after 24th of February, I'm totally out of it.
For Inga, artists are on the front line of cultural change. Art, she believes, has the power to translate complex, painful realities into a language that can truly reach people, especially those who might otherwise look away.
I think translating things into the language of art, this effort of translation always gives the not only the additional value, but also has more power of impact on people which wouldn't see and refer themselves to this kind of information otherwise.
Marija Nemchenko is an artist and academic currently pursuing a PhD. She's been immersed in art since early childhood and has never truly strayed from that path. In recent years, her practice has centered primarily on film, particularly short films and one feature-length experimental documentary, creating video works that interact with other objects. She was invited to join the Dissolutions project by a Latvian co-curator, Salvita Krese, who presented her with 2 residency options, one in Central Asia and another in South Caucasus. Marija chose the second option, finding travel to Armenia more relevant to her ongoing research into the Middle East and cultural intersections between that region and Lithuania.
I've been working in a way to counteract the westernization or Western identification of Lithuania or like Baltic countries. The idea of homogeneous national identity, because I don't think ever really was. So I guess through my papers or research or artworks, subject or area where I'm working is a counteract to define Lithuania as a Scandinavian nation. For me, it's very quite alien. Like I said, through maybe my family's history and certain rituals, I feel almost more familiar with Caucasus or than even going further to Lebanon or Palestine.
At the age of 18, Marija moved to London. She recalls struggling with integration and encountering xenophobia, particularly the prevalent stereotype at a time of Eastern Europeans being perceived as cheap labor.
I mean, when I moved to UK, not speaking any English language, so it was quite hard to adapt to everything. Of course, I faced and experienced a lot of xenophobia, especially I think at that time in UK, being from sort of Eastern Europe was very much equivalent to this cheap labor force, being defined in very degrading terms.
Her interest in Middle Eastern culture emanates from 2 main sources: her own migrant experience and her multicultural family background.
I guess quite a few paths that led into it. I guess because I was sort of from a mixed family, not purely Lithuanian, it was Lithuanian, Russian, Ukrainian. And also looking at my grandmother's photos when she was more like Central Asian features. She doesn't know her dad, but she remembers him being more dark skinned with darker features. But then also culture kind of grew up, Persian carpets on the walls and samovars and like words like finjan being used in my family. I think through noticing some shared objects or shared rituals or a few words as well, I became interested where could have this come from. And finally, when I started kind of digging more into that, seeing how empires moved and what influence they had, and it's like completely the normal. In Lithuania, there were samovars and Persian carpets because both Ottoman Empire and Russian Empire, they overlapped at some point. And now I'm trying to apply the post-colonial theory to post-socialist countries. So there's a lot of different layers been building through many years.
During a residency in Palestine, Marija recalls visiting a local souk and feeling an immediate familiarity. It reminded her of the street markets in Lithuania she used to go frequently as a child. An intuitive communal way people interact in the market felt deeply familiar. The artist clarifies that she's not necessarily describing Lithuania today when much has changed throughout the years. But she finds value in those cracks in the system where informed economies and fluid social exchanges still survive, especially outside the capital.
I understand the differences a lot, but there's a certain thread, I think, of commonality that runs between these regions. Or maybe that's my desire to move away from this Western influence so much that I believe these things exist. I feel that I intuitively relate to them, I feel them.
Marija is critical of how terms like decolonization have been co-opted and emptied of meaning. She believes real decolonization efforts, particularly those related to the ongoing crisis in the Middle East, are often ignored or censored. In the context of the residency, while discussions focused on decolonizing from the Russian influence, she also points out the growing dominance of the English language, particularly among youth. She sees this as another form of colonization that needs to be questioned. While English may serve as a global lingua franca, she stresses the importance of recognizing and resisting multiple forms of cultural erasure.
I feel like the word decolonize became like a clickbait word community being used in a property development project. We saw in the last few years how little meaning actually this word has when it comes to the real decolonization, colonialism that is happening in the Middle East now. I guess I'm kind of increasingly trying to avoid this word because it became for me empty of meaning. I guess words as cultural resistance and trying to create counter-narratives. In this residence, we were speaking a lot about decolonizing from the Russian influence. It's also equivalently being colonized by the English language, schools being established, only the English language, the people, teenagers speaking English language between themselves. I think it's also a dangerous territory that we are stepping. Of course, like English language is a lingua franca. We have to have a language to communicate freely, but I think it's important to be aware of various colonizations, not forget of the whole colonial history that the West has as well, instead of seeing that as a kind of somehow democratic or liberating force.
Maria reflects on the emotional weight of making art in such times, wondering what kind of work she would create if the world were more just and if art didn't need to be reactive. Much of her practice, she says, is driven by the need to respond to economic, political, and social pressures. Besides, that an artist admits to feeling deeply disillusioned recently, particularly after witnessing violence in Lebanon firsthand and watching events in Gaza unfold. These experiences have forced her to question whether her attempts to connect with the Baltic and the Middle Eastern regions to build cultural bridges can really make a difference. Still, she continues her work, holding onto the belief that minor shifts in perception can have ripple effects.
I kind of really started to think, oh my God, I'm trying to do this projects. I've been trying to connect somehow Baltic or Eastern European countries to the Middle East to try to make people see maybe this relevance or whatever, or something that we could have in common. And it's just such a drop in the ocean. At the moment, I feel generally really depressed about the whole situation in the world, and it just feels like we're coming to the Third World War, and I don't know what art projects could change, but I'm still doing them. Maybe perhaps drop by drop, they do make a difference, like a small change, then influencing public opinions do influence public policies.
Despite everything, Maria believes in the role of art as a form of cultural resistance. At times, she finds solace in the act of creation itself, in entering a meditative state when the world briefly recedes and the work takes over.
I really believe in the role of art in the society, and the cultural resistance, I think, is necessary to do that. But sometimes it's hard to stay optimistic when you see there's 2 or 3 people in the world with a press of button can just explode the whole world. So maybe the act of creation itself, when you focus on something and get into the flow of the work, you kind of enter a different territory, a different world, and the act of making itself becomes therapeutic.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Follow the Dissolutions podcast to continue exploring new perspectives, untold stories, and dialogues that connect people.
You've been listening to the Dissolutions podcast. Subscribe for more conversations across the region. In our next episode, we will feature Central Asian artists Nazira Karimi and Nurpire Orenbayeva.